Welcome to Precinct 444. I'm your host, Josh Bronson. Today, we're joined by three leaders behind one of the most impactful movements in contemporary policing, the 30 by 30 initiative. With us are co-founders Maureen McGough and retired Chief Ivonne Roman, as well as Dr. Tanya Meisenholder, who now directs the initiative as it marks its fifth year. Since its launch in 2021, 30 by 30 has partnered with hundreds of agencies nationwide and is expanding globally, working to advance women in policing and strengthen organizational health across the profession. In this conversation, we dig into what the initiative has learned so far, why it continues to resonate in a time of staffing and retention challenges, and what agencies often misunderstand about the work. We'll discuss the critical connection between supporting women and improving systems for everyone, and we'll hear practical, evidence-based ways departments can better attract, retain, and elevate women in policing. Let's dive right in. Thank you so much all for being with me today. I really appreciate it. So I remember when 30 by 30 got started, I was working for IACLEA at the time, the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators. And I heard about the initiative and I was so excited to learn more about it and get as many campus police agencies at the time involved in it. But I'm wondering, as each of you think back to that time when 30 by 30 was started, what stands out to each of you as the most significant lesson that you learned, from working directly with agencies across the country and now, like I said, globally? So maybe we'll start with Mo and go to Chief Roman and then Tanya.
Yeah, it's interesting, Josh, to think back. I remember the conversations we had at the very beginning about this, and that feels like a lifetime ago. I'm sure for you professionally it does as well, because so much has changed since then. I can clearly picture myself at my kitchen table in the middle of COVID on the phone with Ivonne, trying to figure out how the heck we were going to do this and what made the most sense. And I, in retrospect, maybe underestimated the field and their receptivity and the number of people who were willing to sort of step into that moment as courageous leaders. But I also distinctly remember, and this is a really nice full circle moment, the day we heard from Tanya that we were going to get NYPD as one of our launch agencies. Like, that to me feels like maybe one of the most significant turning points. And I don't think we would have had the traction we had as early as we did, or the media attention we had, if we hadn't been able to get NYPD from the start. So it really is sort of wonderful that you started this question with this particular mix of guests, because it is nice to take a moment to reflect on how far we've come and how just sort of critical moments like that were to being able to sit with you today and have that moment of reflection.
That's great. Thank you. And, I think as we hear from our other panelists too, I think it's, part of the joy in working at the museum here, the National Law Enforcement Museum, is getting to really understand the history and see the history of law enforcement in a much more real way. I've learned the history of law enforcement throughout my career, but then to be able to talk to people like yourselves who are making that history and pushing the field forward is just, for me too, it's a full circle moment too, and just really connective of everything that people like yourselves have worked so hard to accomplish. So I appreciate that. Chief?
I think we've learned a lot since we've launched, right? At first, it was just anecdotal, me seeing what was happening in Newark and then seeing what was happening in New Jersey, and then looking at the data that Maureen was able to glean from all the databases available through the DOJ, and we saw that it was a national problem. But I think what we've learned is that it's not a pipeline problem. It's, the recruiting messaging, the hiring processes, the culture, evaluation systems, and informal power networks, and how women are excluded from those at times, or how they have to navigate them in different fashions. So I think that we learned that women are not underrepresented because they lack capability, because we showed that in Newark, right? We trained them how to do those push-ups and they passed the same fitness exam as the men did. What it showed is that they're underrepresented because systems weren't designed with them in mind, how to recruit them, how to train them for the differences in physiology. So I think that's the most important that we've gleaned from the research and from our partner agencies.
Well, and to that point, Chief, I mean, that's a great point because, I can think back on my, in my career and hearing from the women who were working in the agency I was in, just that their pants didn't fit right? Like that they, that there wasn't the correct fit. And even things like that we might not have thought of at, the time where it was a big deal. It is a big deal. If you're not comfortable in your uniform, getting down to a really basic level, right? If you're not comfortable in the uniform that you're wearing, it's harder to do your job. And it's not a comfortable uniform anyway, right? But to make it even more uncomfortable is, just that much harder to make it through a shift and have your thoughts where they need to be. So I really appreciate that. Tanya?
Yeah, God, it seems like eons ago at this point when I first, met Mo and Ivonne and heard about what they were doing at the time. As Mo mentioned, I was at the NYPD and I was thinking, what incredible forces of nature that I have right here. And they are going to do so much, never envisioning that I would have the opportunity to be part of it. I would say one thing that struck me as we started this work in the NYPD was the police commissioner at the time said to me very clearly, Tanya, I'm going to sign this letter. You're asking me to do something, I'm going to do it, but I'm committing that this agency will be part of supporting women. And I expect you to hold me accountable to that. And that was a really important message to me. It basically said, like, this is not like a PR stunt. This is something that we really want to focus on. Because what we find often is agencies want help. They want practical help. They want resources. And they also recognize, as much as we do, that a lot of the things that we talk about when we're focused on improving women in the workplace benefits everyone in the workplace, civilian, men, everyone in the workplace. So it's about improving the workplace for all employees. To me, is what it comes down to.
No, I love that. And, I think that's one of the things that's often overlooked in all of this, right? Is that if you're improving the workplace, it benefits everybody. And just a quick example of that for our listeners. I was, when I was working for the National Association of Women Law Enforcement Executives, I was at a information table at a conference, representing NALI. And a couple of male officers came up to the table, realized that I was, with NALI and started to walk away from the table. And I called them back over to talk to them more. Well, long story short, one of the things that came from the conversation is that, NALI was working on improving, the availability of childcare for agencies, for officers and agencies, so that they, could work different shifts and things like that. And one of the male officers sort of stopped and just stared at me for a minute, and he said, "That was me. Like, I couldn't get promoted because I was a single father, and they wouldn't let me adjust my schedule, and so I couldn't work midnights because I didn't have childcare available." And I was like, yes, that's exactly, this is what we're trying to do, right? Is improve the workforce. And in improving the workforce, it will make it better for everybody. With that, I think it actually lends itself to the next question I had for you all. Misconceptions, right? What, that people think they understand what 30 by 30 is. And sometimes they almost get there. Sometimes they really don't fully understand it. But what are some of the most common misunderstandings that you all have encountered throughout the time that 30 by 30 has been in existence?
A few of the misconceptions, which really misrepresent what we're about, is that it's a quota system, that it's about lowering standards, that it's political, that it's about favoritism, that it's about removing men from policing. And, Mo and Ivonne have a great line, it's none of these things, nor do we want it to be. But I'll stop there because I know these two are going to weigh in.
Yeah, Josh, it's I love that you asked this question, because any chance we have to dispel the common myths is really helpful. We actually just, Tanya's leading the development of a series through Police One, and our first article was entirely dedicated to those myths. So maybe we can link that in the show notes. But I think that the myth that I would love to see dispelled is that when you talk about making things more fair or more equitable, that is the work of the underrepresented group. And you see this all the time, right? In agencies, in private industry, public industry. If you want to improve inclusion in a workplace, you have all of these people who are under-included at the table to figure out how to change systems that they did not create, that do not benefit them. And, research shows that if you're in an underrepresented group, you're already doing extra work to prove that you belong there in the first place. And then we put the entire burden of shifting these decades, if not centuries old system at the feet of folks who are already not being served. And so it's always a little bit disheartening when we speak in places like IACP and the room is almost exclusively women, because only 3% of police chiefs in this country are women, right? And making improvements more to the inclusivity and modernization of police workforce is the work of everyone. And so it's, Josh, you're a perfect example of an advocate who steps into the space, right? Both in your work in Nolly and your work advocating for 30 by 30. Like, we need everybody at the table to make these improvements a sustainable reality.
Real quick, if I could jump in too, that I think that's a really interesting point. And, how do you change that though? What sort of work have you done to be able to incorporate more men into the conversation? Using your example of IECP, for example, it's a great space to be able to, talk about, 30 by 30 and the initiative. But how do you then bring more men into that space?
I mean, I think a lot of it is inviting people to the table proactively. We've heard from so many chiefs who say, like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I don't say anything at all. So we're both sort of doing some fundraising right now, actually, to kind of create some training and toolkits for male allies to make sure they understand the space and they're empowered to be part of the discussion in a way that actually transforms the profession. But the other thing we're super conscious of, I mean, we have a stable of them. They are men in positions of power who will speak on our behalf. And the people whose minds we need to change often will hear that message better from someone who looks more like them. And we acknowledge that. And we're super grateful for the people who step out and support us that way. I mean, our first chief who signed is Ken Clary out of Bellevue, Nebraska. And he probably did more to recruit agencies than any of us ever could, right? We've got this nice stronghold in the middle of Nebraska because Ken wouldn't let his peers not be a part of the transformation.
That's great. Thank you. Chief Clary's a great guy.
Yeah.
Chief, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to not give you a chance to answer either. So if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that a male officer brought up that he himself was experiencing issues with childcare. The way that, the issues that we advocate for are from a gender frame. But if you address those issues, it doesn't only improve outcomes for the women, it addresses barriers that are friction points for the entire agency. It benefits everyone. So I used to think of issues like, the uniform, right? And the childcare issues and family leave as women issues. But then as I was a captain in a police precinct, I had men just as often as women tell me that they needed shift accommodations, or they needed to leave early, or maybe go on to another squad because they needed that flexibility to assist with that work-life stability. So I think addressing it as something that benefits the entire agency, not just women, improves acceptance and less friction towards this, because it really does benefit the entire agency.
Well, and to that point, do you think, how do you get that message across effectively within an agency that this is going to benefit everybody? Because I think you're right. I think as men, I think sometimes we're taught, just suck it up and deal with it, right? I mean, women are taught that too in a different way, certainly. But, that as men, we're taught, you're not supposed to care about that. That's not your, sort of, issue to worry about. So when it comes to things like childcare and things like that, it does impact, it has a real impact, family leave, all these sorts of things, right? Part-time work, as far as part-time officers go. How do you sort of break down those barriers and make it more comfortable for men to also speak up in those sorts of situations? Because I think that is one of the powerful things about 30 by 30 that you've been able to accomplish, is that, breaking down some of those barriers and those stereotypes about what anybody's supposed to care about, and what is a particular issue for a particular gender identity.
To enforce that these policies that are in place, that they're actually taking advantage of, and it doesn't seem like it's just to benefit one group versus another. And that means that people in these leadership roles have to actually take parental leave, right? And make sure that it's known, or that when they talk about a program, let's say for wellness, right, that it shows the burnout decreases and the positive outcomes, not just in women, but the entire workforce. So it's again, working on the narrative, right? Don't make this about benefiting one group. It benefits the entire organization, whether it's by protecting all employees or reducing liability exposure or increasing trust in the leadership, right? That they care about the entire workforce. That will improve morale. And then you're not saying that we care more about this group or we're going to dedicate more resources to this group. It's actually for the benefit of the entire agency, because what we advocate for is to improve outcomes in policing overall, not just for one group.
I think that's exactly right. And I also think it's about like challenging leaders to rethink about their role in their people's work experience. So we've done, trainings in different contexts, whether it be like for state posts or at the agency level. And sometimes we'll hear from people in positions of leadership, men or women, right? Well, that's just an aspect of this job. You knew it coming in, like just figure out how to do it, right? And focus on getting done what I need you to do. And so the challenge to folks who think that way is, what would happen if you reconceptualized your role as a leader to make sure everybody under your command had exactly what they needed to do to stay in this job and do a really good job doing it, right? And that's not necessarily how every leader sees their role. And I think when they make that sort of mental shift, they automatically are going to be put in a position of advocacy for many of these changes, regardless of gender.
Well, I think too, the thing that I always come back to too, when with these types of conversations, is that we do this across the board. It's not just a policing issue, right? I mean, these are societal challenges very often that we're having these conversations, certainly framed around policing, but I'm reminded of athletes, for example, and how constantly female athletes are asked about their kids or childcare, those sorts of things. Whereas even if a male athlete is a father and everybody knows that they never get asked those sorts of questions. So I think this is a really impactful movement for a lot of ways, because it brings a lot of those issues to the surface. But how do you sort of connect, when you're in this space of law enforcement, of policing, but you see that these are larger societal challenges? How do you connect all those dots? And, I mean, there are a lot of challenges that, we can't tackle, on a day-to-day basis, but this is one that you all are tackling within policing. So how do you make that connection then to the societal challenges around it as well?
That's a great, really great, powerful challenge. And one thing we do is we pay attention to what else is happening with women. If you think about the McKinsey report that came out this year, that was all over social media, and just, what that said and the meaning of that. But we also think about how policing is different for women than perhaps some other industries. And there are differences. One really good example is the shift, right? In many places, you don't have to work such a rigid schedule where there's so little room for movement. I would say, and I'd love to hear what Ivonne and Mo have to say about this, but I would call all of us, feminist, and perhaps not the traditional sense, but we pay attention to what's happening in the larger landscape around these issues and think about what it means for us and for policing in particular, and how it influences the work that we do as 30 by 30 and with police departments.
As a society, we are learning and expanding and trying to get away from those tight norms, right? What was done in the 50s, or even let's say science, right? Science goes expanding and learning and iterating, right? And so when you look at policing, you have to think of it the same way. it should not remain static because we get new research. We find out that you shouldn't put pressure on someone's back because of positional asphyxia. Those are lessons that we learned along the way. So by expanding the policies to be inclusive and then learning, we create an agency that from the outside looks legitimate. And if the officers feel that it's legitimate, they then will act in that manner, and the community will then in turn accept that agency as having the best practices, having strong policies, being reflective of the community that they're serving, and that it's constantly learning. You don't want an organization that seems like it's still embedded in the 1800s, the 1900s, right? It has to evolve. That's the nature of societies and how they grow and become stronger. So by improving what we're doing in this police department, we're also improving outcomes for society, and society will in turn view it as more legitimate.
I could not agree more with everything that was just said. And one of the things I love about this is, and I think we saw this when we first launched, right? There were a lot of chiefs who actually wanted to do this, who wanted to prioritize equity work as part of what they were doing. They just needed some kind of top cover and guidance in order to do it. But in prioritizing the types of issues that we're advocating for here, it automatically, if they're able to do it, puts policing as a much more progressive, forward-thinking institution than they historically are in the arc of history, right? So Tanya does a great job of this, about really talking about modernizing the workplace and modernizing the workforce in the process. It changes the narrative about the role of this particular public institution, and it really gives people an opportunity to be part of sort of proactively advancing equity, as opposed to being behind the times and justifying and trying to catch up and being sued into compliance for what good looks like. So I think that's one of the things that's really attractive to a lot of the leaders we work with, who are really like pushing the envelope, trying to modernize the workplace. This is just a key component of that.
That's great. This is such a interesting conversation. I've learned so much from all of you over the years of 30 by 30 being in existence, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to talk to you. So, continuing on with some other topics, what? Let me ask you this: what is the percentage right now of women in policing? Do you know where we sit right now?
A great question. Since the national data, no offense, Shelley, if you're going to listen, is not necessarily up to date. It depends on what type of agency you're talking about, but in the local, it's just above 13% for local police departments. Having said that, there is a delay in data. We do collect information from our agencies on the percentage of females or women in their departments, but that's constantly changing as people leave the department and new folks come in. But the best answer is just above 13%.
And Josh, another promo for Tanya's Police One series, her second article in Police One series, which is about to be submitted now, goes into those numbers, trends, and also our understanding of the reasons for them being what they are. So we can give you that for show notes as well.
Okay, great. Well, and one of the reasons I asked that question is because here in the museum we have facts about policing that go up across our web of law enforcement, and I see the fact flash up all the time. 12% of women in law enforcement. 12% of law enforcement are women, and I think that's a testament. Even though it's only risen, slightly, that's still something, right? We're starting to see, a shift, and I think that's a testament to the work you all are really engaged in and doing.
One thing I would add, Josh, is it's also important to think about the number of recruits. So we also know from the Bureau of Justice Statistics what the latest numbers are from training academies, and that for women that are entering training, that's about 20%. So if you think about it, 1 in 5 recruits are female. I think we could have a discussion on how we view this as progress or lack thereof when you think about representation of women in law enforcement overall. But the data is really important at various points across the employee life cycle, from recruitment to hiring to promotions to retention, et cetera, and so on. And that's something that we all push for as we do this work.
And that's a great point. So, when you all launched back in 2021, staffing and retention were already concerns. Today, there's still staffing and retention concerns within policing. And we're talking broadly, right? Not just within, hiring and retaining more women. So within this current environment, why do you think 30 by 30 continues to resonate with agencies like it does?
Well, so this is maybe tied to the myths question too, Josh. Like, I think we've heard from some chiefs say things like, I can't focus on bringing in women. I'm just trying to get bodies in the door. And our point is, well, the way you've been historically doing things has excluded women from your recruitment narratives, and you're missing literally half of the population, right? So what we are doing is actually significantly supporting your efforts to address that crisis, not minimizing your shot at getting enough qualified people in the door in your agency. So I think that's certainly part of it.
I couldn't agree more, Mo. And also, we don't say don't hire men. We say there's this pool of people that you might want to consider would be really good officers. And so I think that's something that unfortunately we have to clarify at particular points, even though we shouldn't have to. Ivonne, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think that the reason why our partners have remained and we continue to get interest in the program is that there's a realization that 30 by 30 isn't a diversity initiative. It's a workforce sustainability strategy, right? So if you look at the labor market, it's changed. You have a younger generation and they prioritize culture and fairness and accountability. They evaluate what leadership is it credible? And they expect clear pathways to growth. And a lot of our recommendations align with that. So if you engage in these activities, right, and follow these recommendations, you won't only improve outcomes for women, you're going to improve outcomes in your overall recruitment and retention.
I think that's so true. Today's generation, they hate performative, initiatives and all those sorts of things, right? Where, you say you're doing something, but you're not actually showing that you're doing it, right? And I think that what you just said is so important because it also, again, going back to the idea of, yes, 30 by 30 seeks to increase the number of women in policing, but it also, all of the initiatives they're going to be things that speak to men in there too. And if you assume that if agencies, not you all, but if you as agencies, you assume that all men are looking for a certain thing within policing, right? That's also, you're cutting out a tremendous amount of the population as well. And when you can sort of focus those efforts and really sort of show that, this is what policing is all about, right? Like, yes, there are those times where you have to, the SWAT and, all those things that traditionally show up in, recruitment ads and things like that. But most of policing are just interpersonal, interpersonal relationships and building relationships with the public and, all of these sorts of things. So everybody has something to bring to the table. Not everybody has to be good at everything, but we have to find people that are good at certain aspects of policing, and to cut out at least 50% of the population, it just has never made sense to me. Tanya, did you want to say something?
Josh, I want to comment on something you said, and we can link this in the survey notes too, but that 30 by 30 is based on two things, right? 30% is the theory of, depending on which way you're looking at it, either critical mass theory or the theory of representative bureaucracy. And we can link to that and talk more about that. And then the other 30 is quite clearly 2030, the year. So it made sense at the time. But to be very clear, we don't care if agencies get to 30%. There's 40% of agencies in the United States of the 18,000 have no women at all. What we want is women to have the opportunity, qualified women to have the opportunity to join policing in healthy organizations. there are some police departments that I know of, and I'm certain that Ivonne and Mo are aware of as well. I would not encourage a woman to go there because I just don't think that the organizational health and culture is ready to support that. That's what we're trying to work on. We're trying to improve police departments where they are a place where women can work just as easily as men, and it shouldn't be any more difficult for them. So that 30% is aspirational. It's a goal. But we're about much more than that. We're about recruitment strategies, employee life cycle, and policies, and culture, and sexual harassment, and all of these other things. So I just want to make sure that that point comes across very clear.
I think the flip side is important too. Like Tanya, that's such a good point, that if you're doing everything equitably in a way that meets everybody's needs, we're agnostic about the number that's at the end of it. But we've also had people say to us, I don't need to join, I'm already at 30%. And our guess is there's still plenty of opportunity to improve internal policies and practices, right? So it's really important to remember that.
Well, and Tanya, I love what you said, and you too, Mo. But I love what you said about encouraging somebody to join a department, right? Because I would also say that if those same departments that you all probably know of that you wouldn't encourage a woman to join, I probably wouldn't encourage another man to join either, right? Like it's, because they're probably the culture of that department is such that, that, and I think that's one of those shifts we still have to make, right? All of us, is that if it's not healthy for women to join, it's not a healthy department, right? And I think that is what 30 by 30 has been working to address, is that there are so many departments out there that just haven't been healthy in one way, shape, or form over the years. And I love what you all are doing around that, and and clarifying too that it's not just about the numbers, right? Because I do think, to your point, Mo, so many agencies do get caught up. I remember when I was doing outreach to agencies about 30 by 30, I would hear that exact thing, is that we already have, we have 50% women in our department even, and it's like, well, okay, that's great, but you could still join then.
Probably all the more important to get super intentional about your policies and make sure you know how to meet their needs, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, so what, as far as data that you've collected along these lines, regarding workplace culture, safety, overall agency health, what has the data shown that you all have collected with regards to these things?
I'm going to punt that one to Mo to start off with. Yeah, so we've got a few different mechanisms for insights, right? So when we were first standing up the initiative, huge credit actually to Ganesha Martin, who was at Mark 43 at the time, but she really stressed to us the importance of making sure that women's lived experiences were reflected in everything that we did, and really acknowledging everyone who had come before to try and make a difference in the space and had made a significant difference. So we partnered with Mark 43 on a national listening tour. So we had data about sort of women's firsthand experiences, concerns, belief in what mattered most for improving their experiences and representation. We did a survey of early 30 by 30 agencies where we got over 600 responses from women across the country. And then for any agency that participates in 30 by 30, there's a regular reporting requirement. So they report to us in 6-month increments about what's going well, what isn't happening at all, and why, and then also some basic numbers about representation in their agencies. So we were really intentional about trying to make this as data-driven as possible, understanding that data collection can be expensive, and we were and still are operating on a bit of a shoestring. We also did lose some federal funding that was supporting some data collection and analysis, so we no longer have the same type of visibility or insight into agency progress. But before we lost that funding, we were able to do some pretty rigorous analyses of those 6-month agency reports and had some pretty strong themes across those reports. I'd love to kick it to Tanya to talk about some of the specifics of that, because Tanya, I think you're a little bit more well-versed in that. But I know one top line takeaway is that of the reporting agencies who had been with us for 2 years, there was a 28% increase in the representation of women in their recruit classes. So we have every reason to be optimistic about our approach.
Yeah. And just to add to that, we, as Mo said, different ways of collecting information and data from our agencies. And we're well over 400 at this point across the US and Canada. But we do collect that data on demographics of sworn officers as well as their recruits. And one of the things that's important to note that I credit Mo and Ivonne for this is really getting agencies to acknowledge what data they have and what they don't have. And I think that I can easily say that 30 by 30 has forced some agencies to really think about how to collect better data and to put systems in place to do so. You know, one of the things that I'll point out that's happening in the federal government right now is this discussion of data. And there's nothing wrong with collecting data. And we need to be very, very clear about that. You need to collect data in order to make decisions. What you have to think about is how that data is used. In addition to the data that we have talked about, is we've also collected information on certain things like, do you have a pregnancy policy? Do you have a policy on sexual harassment? How many agencies have access to childcare? So, you know, in one other thing that we'll put in the notes is our impact report, and it talks a lot about everything that we've collected from agencies thus far and what the data has shown. We do know a couple of things that are very clear. You know, early experiences for many of our officers are really important. So those first couple of years is something that we have to talk about. Clear policies. And, you know, with one caveat, you know, policies are important, but it's how they are implemented in an agency that makes them even, you know, more relevant for modernization. And then really transparency around structure and around pathways, whether that's recruitment, hiring, promotions, opportunities, whatever the case may be. Those are some very consistent themes that we see across of our agencies from what we hear, no matter, you know, how we hear that.
Great, thank you. You know, one of the things that I keep coming back to, you know, in the conversation, and we touched on it briefly earlier, but I'd like to dive in a little bit more because I think it's really important. Because I think it's one of those you know things that people you know sort of have preconceived notions about. But that's around the idea of special treatment and lowering standards. You know, and I think that that's one of those things that's really misunderstood about 30 by 30. Any group that's you know looking to improve you know the number of women coming into the profession and the number of leaders being promoted and you know all of this. So what do you say to people that say well, you just want to lower the standards to get more women in, you just want that quota system, you know, those sorts of things?
Ivonne, you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one because you have to hold up a mirror to them and see why they assume that talking about recruiting a diverse group of people automatically means lowering standards. We never advocated for lowering standards. In fact, when I started this in Newark, the women passed the same exact test as the men. But then when I advertised that I was doing this in the parks, that women could come out and train with us, we had the old timers chime in the comments saying, oh, great, an affirmative action program. Men work out together in a gym all the time and no one calls it affirmative action, right? So the assumption then is that if you bring people that are other in, that you're somehow lowering standards. And it's addressing and challenge that knee-jerk reaction that somehow what was traditional, what was done in the past is better. And again, I'll say that, you know, we have to evolve. Science evolves, policies evolve to reflect new knowledge and new research. So it's pushing back on that narrative in a way that holds that mirror up. And why is your automatic assumption that someone applying and going through the same standards as everyone else is somehow a negative outcome?
And there's also this confusing loyalty to a set of standards and definition of good that has never been empirically validated at all. And that's confusing just in a general level. But when you think about the high stakes of the police profession, and if you're out there, I would think that you would want to make sure that anyone who was hired to back you up actually had what it takes to do the job well and right. But that's not necessarily shared broadly.
Yeah. And, one quick thing I would add is like when you're fixing systems that are broken, that's not special treatment. That is like remedying, issues in the workforce. And so I think it's much more complicated as an answer. And I feel like sometimes people just go to this special treatment thing because they can't rationalize why, maybe for their own, reasons, like why a woman got a promotion and they didn't, for instance. And it's because she was qualified, not because we're looking for her to get special treatment. And that's one thing that we've always been very clear of. We don't advocate for favoritism or special treatment, but I think we also can acknowledge that whatever you want to call it, friends and family, nepotism, cronyism, those are things that have historically affected many police departments. So what we're trying to do is make the system more transparent and more fair for everyone that works there.
Could add on. So the goal isn't to change who qualifies to become a police officer. It's to ensure that the qualification process reflects the realities of modern policing and not tradition or norms, or that's what we always did.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the keys is that we've always done it this way, right? So we're just going to keep doing it this way. I had to go through it, so everybody has to go through it, right? That idea. You see that in sports too, and other places, are hazing even, right? And fraternities and sororities and things like that. Well, I had to do this, so you have to do it too. And it becomes this rite of passage when there's really no reason for anybody to have to do something, like that. I mean, I know plenty of men that can't do more than a pull up or something, that we have this idea of this physicality of law enforcement, and, you need to have this big macho guy. And that's generally not the reality, where there are plenty of men that can't do those things either. So to make it more fair for everybody, I think is exactly what you all have done such a great job at, in trying to advocate for.
A quick anecdote. I was at the academy once, and there was this guy that looked like he was chiseled by the Greek gods. A beautiful body, right? And he starts hyperventilating like 10 minutes into the workout. And so we have to call an ambulance, and I start asking him questions. And because he was so focused on bodybuilding, he didn't do any cardio. So he almost died within the first 10 minutes. So it's that assumption that the muscles and the brawn makes you a better police officer, right? Sometimes they don't hold up to being challenged by reality.
Yeah, there were more times that I had to run as a police officer than lift something very heavy. So, and there were even more times when I just had to sit there and use my brain and think, quickly on the spot, right? And, get through something, with very little physicality. So, when it comes to agencies that are maybe interested in 30 by 30, or they've heard of 30 by 30, but they haven't yet joined, or they're just uncertain where to start. What's something actionable that they can take away today if they're listening to better support and advance women in policing, but like we've been talking about, improving agencies, when it comes to this?
As I mentioned earlier, we have, over 400 agencies at this point. We have a wealth of resources on our What Works page, which I would encourage anyone that's interested in supporting women and advancing their workforce really to take a look at and think about what that shows. But a lot of what we do in 30 by 30 is kind of a roadmap or a practical guide to getting agencies to think about what's most important for their workforce and for meeting the unique needs of women. So some of the things that we've seen agencies do is pay more attention to their data, think about how they're collecting it, think about their physical fitness assessments, find out when was the last time it was validated, if it ever has been, consider whether their pregnancy policy is update. They're tangible, practical things that agencies can and should be doing to support their workforce. This to me in many ways is management, but it's not things that people are always thinking about when you're running a business. And I'm a firm believer that running a police department is running a business in many ways. So The other thing that I think it's important to point out is you don't have to join 30 by 30 to have a commitment to your employees and to doing the work to support women in particular, but you do need to be paying attention to your workforce. And so we have a number of agencies that for one reason or another haven't formally joined 30 by 30, and that's fine. But they do sign up for our listserv. They do listen to our podcast. They do pay attention to what's happening in policing more broadly and think about what our work means for the broader policing workforce. Mo, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great summary of what we offer. And, we were really intentional when we created the 30 by 30 pledge to focus on things that were, for the most part, no or lower cost. But some of them do take time, especially around things like data collection. So if an agency head really is committed to better supporting, especially women in the workplace, I think we'd also encourage them to make sure that their officers are aware of the affinity groups and programs through places like NOLI, especially for state and locals, or WIFL for our feds, even some of the regional groups that have grown up with increasing frequency, because it's going to take time for agencies to really reflect the modernization practices that they're implementing. And it's really important to make sure officers are supported through that transition.
Thank you. And we can definitely put links to to anything that you'd like in the show notes, so that people listening can take full advantage of what 30 by 30 offers.
Thanks.
I really, again, I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us. I want to give you each the opportunity to share any final closing thoughts that you might have, with regards to anything you've seen, experienced over the past few years, or even going back throughout your careers, when it comes to how we improve our departments, and specifically around, increasing the number of women within those departments. I mean, and the number of leaders of our departments who are women. Some of the best leaders that I've had throughout my career, I've been lucky to work for, several excellent, both men and women, but some of the female leaders that I've had, the privilege of serving under throughout my career, they left the most impact on me, in learning skills that weren't necessarily taught to me, as a man and as a male leader. So, I'd really be interested to hear, what you think, closing thoughts around the topic here today.
I can start. So one of the points I'd like to make is, women have been in policing for some time, and they're here, right? There's numbers and, tens of thousands of women in policing, and they're not going away. So, this 30 by 30 is about strengthening policing. It's about modernizing the workforce. I want to be very clear about what we are and what we aren't. But when you see women that can't be successful in an agency, it means that the systems aren't working. And that's what you really need to consider. And when they're struggling and when others in the organization are struggling, it often points to where many of the gaps are. So, just again, this is about workforce modernization and improving what this work looks like for the future. I don't think that all of a sudden we're going to get out of the staffing challenges that are facing policing. These issues are here to stay. It's how does policing as an institution react to that and evolve as a result of that. And part of that means supporting the workforce that you already have, which includes women.
The takeaway that I think is coming to mind the most on this particular conversation is, I know I did this, is underestimated the power and influence that people actually have. I think when we think about the police profession, a lot of these types of issues feel intractable, like it's like just part of what it must be. And that's just not true. And I worry sometimes that maybe we went a little bit too broad with the levers that we were trying to pull, because some of the biggest changes we see are in agencies who have an executive who says, I care about this, and I will make it my mission to understand how to use my discretion to make things better for everyone. And that's where you see the changes, right? It doesn't have to be that complicated. So the real power of an advocate at the top is huge. The flip side of that is there's so much power from people in their lived experiences who are on the job now. I think about the fact 30 by 30 exists because Ivonne saw some absolute nonsense happening in the state of New Jersey and became an advocate for it at the national level. We have 30 Forward in Canada because Inspector Val Gates noticed a lot of the same trends and wanted to make sure that that difference was felt across the border too. We're seeing the same sort of like individually led advocacy in other parts of the globe as well. So yes, it's really important to have somebody in an executive leadership position who's an advocate. And even if you don't have access to that positional authority, you could have the impact as a transformational change agent.
Yeah, so I think the message that people should glean from what 30 by 30 has done so far is that when we improve these systems for women, we improve systems for everyone. There should be, in any organization that is thriving and being run effectively, there should be clear standards or transparent advancement, supportive leadership. And those aren't gendered benefits, they're organizational strengths. And agencies that invest in those strengths are better positioned for the future. So creating these stronger systems means creating stronger officers, and that in turn creates stronger agencies and stronger communities. So they shouldn't look at it narrowly as this is a gendered issue, but it's a form of enhancing the entire organization and what they do for their employees and in turn for their citizens, the constituents.
Well, yeah. And when you make the agency better, when you improve the agency, you're improving public safety at the end of the day, right? And at the end of the day, that's the name of the game, right? Is protecting the public and serving the public and being there when something bad happens. And that's reducing police work quite a bit. Obviously, there's much more to it than that, but you all are being that change. You are that change, and you're driving that change. And I really do appreciate what you're doing, what you've done. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I thought this was a really great conversation. I hope our listeners did as well. The ongoing leadership that you've shown with the 30 by 30 initiative, but going beyond that is just remarkable. And, your work really continues to shine a light on the systems, structures, and cultures that shape policing, not just for women, but for everyone who serves and everyone who depends on effective, trustworthy public safety. If your agency wants to learn more about the 30 by 30 initiative, the research behind it, or how to get involved, visit 30by30initiative.org and explore the many resources that are available. Thank you all so much for listening to Precinct 444. I'm Josh Bronson. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the Precinct.